Hello, I'm James Sproul. I'm the Chief Economist and Director of Policy here at the Institute of Directors in London. I want to talk to you today about one of the most interesting things I think is happening within the UK economy and within the broader society, and certainly one that's been very, very controversial over the years, and that's how income is distributed over the entire United Kingdom economy. When we're talking internationally, most times people look at what's called a Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is a number in which a score of 1 means that one person in an economy or society has all of the wealth, and a score of 0 means all of the wealth is distributed evenly across the economy, regardless of any degree of effort or merit. Clearly, each of these extremes is pretty undesirable. For most countries, they fit between, say, 0.45 and 0.25, with a few outliers sitting above. For instance, it might be a very rich oil country in which a few sheikhs have an enormous amount of wealth, and that pushes your Gini up, or there may be a few communist countries which have very, very low Ginis because of, again, forced distribution on the way down. But most countries, as I say, fit between 0.25 and 0.45. The UK bottomed out at about 0.28 in the late 1970s, and sits now at about 0.40. And that's up a little bit over the last 4 or 5 years. But I think the real key here is the way in which the Gini moved over the course of the 1980s and early 1990s. Then we went from, as I say, 0.28 to a 0.38. That was a very, very rapid movement. But in saying that was a very rapid movement, I think we're losing some of the emphasis, and simply moving up one single number doesn't fully explain what's been happening to income distribution across the United Kingdom as a whole. A lot of people seem to think that 1979 or the late 1970s were some sort of golden age in regard to income distribution in the UK. So I think it's really useful to understand that number a little bit more carefully. If you look at the graph, you can see very clearly the distribution of income in 1979. It's a very, very high, very tall peak. Now, the vertical axis represents the number of households, and the horizontal axis represents the amount of income, and that income has been adjusted for inflation. So in 1979, the average income was £7,500 per family per year. And we can see that very clearly. Very few people earned more than that, and so we have what is, in statistical terms, known as a very tight standard deviation. This is a very, very interesting time, and we have to think of what contributed to that kind of income distribution across the United Kingdom. What kind of economy is dominated on that? And I would say that the number of factors that filtered into that. First of all, there was an enormous amount of trade union representation within the economy as a whole. Trade unions typically don't like large wage differentials, and you can see that the fact that they were able to negotiate very, very narrow pay differences between their members. And given that the dominant position they had within the economy as a whole, you can see pretty clearly that they were successful at that. But I think it's more than that as well. The United Kingdom economy in 1979 was very much a manufacturing economy. It tended to have people as part of a process, and they really were only valuable as part of that process. And so, again, it tended to force a lot of incomes down towards a median very, very effectively. Now, in 1979, clearly Mrs. Thatcher came to power, and the United Kingdom started a very, very rapid transformation away from a heavily manufacturing-oriented, heavily unionized economy to one that was much, much more broadly service-based and much more meritocratic in its economic basing. And we can see what happened between 1979 and 1989, where the UK economy undertook actually an extraordinarily rapid transformation away from the prevailing era of 1979. And in fact, it's pretty obvious, given the speed at which they moved away in 1979 to the 1989 figure, that there was an enormous amount of inbuilt pressure to make that movement away. And I think that's an extraordinarily interesting and very important, because no country moved as far and as fast as the UK did over that period, which in economic terms points to 1979 being something of an anomaly, holding the economy and society back at that time to a new, some sort of new normal, or certainly a new set of circumstances. Since then, we can see that the trend has continued pretty steadily until the mid-2000s. And we look at it today, say 2009, and again in 2012, we can see what's happened to that graph. And clearly what we have today is a much, much more diffuse amount of income over society as a whole. Certainly that the average income has gone from about £3,500 per year per household to just under £30,000. So there's almost a 4-time increase there. So clearly people are better off. But I think the really key thing here is not just what's been happening to the median or a single figure, whether that single figure be median income or Gini coefficient. It's really important to understand what's been happening in the broad society as a whole. And you can see that we've got a much, much more diffuse earnings across the economy. And that's really, if we think of the sort of economy that underpins that more diffuse earnings, it's much more likely to be individual pay bargaining. It's much more likely that the pay is going to be determined by individual effort, or certainly no larger than group or at most firm effort. And because we've got more small companies in the economy as a whole, it's natural that we have a greater degree of variance in the outcome. So I think what we've seen here, and given the fact that the income distribution hasn't changed much in the last couple of years, what we've got is very much a new normal. So for those people who in some way want to say, we want a narrow income differential, one really has to ask, well, how are you going to achieve that? How are you going to force the mass of the population, which is clearly settled on a new income distribution, how are you going to force them into the narrow income distribution, which some would suppose as being, quote unquote, better? My own view is that that's almost impossible to imagine happening, and that therefore what we really need to do is accept the new income dispersion that we had, and realize this is actually an outcome of a more meritocratic and in many ways a better society that we enjoy today. I hope you found this interesting. I've found this interesting and been looking at it for many, many years. How income is distributed over time in the United Kingdom is one of those things that really starts to help you understand the way in the economy and our society has changed and will continue to change in future. It's one of those things in which I think we have an income distribution which in many ways reflects the modern economy in which we're all living. I think it's something that's unlikely to be changing, not because governments are unwilling to do anything, but because governments can't do anything, not without draconian interventions of the sort that none of us would like to see.